Howdy, kids. Today's distance learning, the hippies. Those long-haired freaky people, as my dad used to say. Want to take a look today at the late 60s and early 70s and the hippie movement. Uh, you, you, the images, as you see over there, are what they are. It's the hippie movement. It was a youth movement. Most of the people, high school, college kids, young age kids, again, the phrase was always don't trust anyone over 30. And it was a rebellious culture. It was a culture that rejected society. They rejected support of America and the war and everything else. And it was all a time of, it was just a weird time. It really starts in the early 60s in San Francisco. It's based off basically the old beat movement. But as the anti war movement picks up ground, the 60s becomes really a psychedelic hippie type culture. And it's really fueled by the war in Vietnam. And when people think about this, you think of the 60s, it really wraps around into the early 70s. And it was a time it was, oh my God, all sorts of boundaries and barriers getting broken. It was a time of free love and, of course, all the consequences. Nothing is free. There's a lot of drug use during that time. I mean, the rise of marijuana and then mind altering stuff like LSD was all fed into the youth culture. The look of the hippies. The picture on the right, you see Jenny there. That's a typical hippie movement, the tie-dyed and stuff like that. Now, I'm from Bennington, Nebraska, and we really didn't have many hippies that I remember in Bennington, and certainly not in my household. Remember my dad talking about none of my boys will have that long Jesus hair, he used to call it. Like if you look at the picture of the two guys down below or John Lennon, you see that Jesus hair, as Dad used to call it. I never did get long hair. I always had to get it cut. Went to college, had long hair for like a year, went in the military, always had short hair, came out, boom. Long hippie hair was gone. But it was long. A lot of it, beards and mustaches too, and a lot of afros. It was a time of the bigger the better with the afros, baby. The clothes, bell bottoms. I still remember bell bottoms. So I think of this era, I think of bell bottom jeans. And by the 70s, the bell bottoms got really wide. They had these things called elephant bells. I mean, you had bell bottoms that were like, I don't know, a couple feet wide. It was just ridiculous. Tie-dyed shirts. It was, again, an expression. Today you buy tie-dyed shirts in the store, and schools and all have tie-dyed shirts for this and that. But back then, that was an expression. It was a way you could express yourself. So you see a lot of that. Go-go boots and miniskirts. Yeah, well, what do you got to say? Peace signs. If you look over there, you see the peace sign. The peace sign, people who were against the war were called doves. And if you look at the peace sign, in a way, it's kind of like a footprint of a bird, of a dove, okay? People supported the war were hawks. People that opposed the war were doves. And the peace sign is going to be everywhere. Again, not in my household, mind you, but everywhere else. And there are other stuff, flowers, patches on jeans. And it was just, people relaxed a lot more with their clothes. It was more of what you wore was an expression of yourself and all. This is a picture from a book that I found. It's kind of cool taking a look at, again, just the wild fashions of the time. And every now and again in our society, some of this stuff will come back through, and for a little while, you have tie-dye this and that and the little hippie looking stuff. But it was just a different time. The lingo, and to my students, okay, this is where you get it. I grew up, I was born in 1960, so I was, kid of the 60s and 70s, and so this is the lingo that I even talk about today. Keep cool, baby. Keep cool. Be groovy. It just meant about hanging in there, just doing the right thing, taking it easy. There was a lot of slang for policemen, and I always do respect the cops, always do. But back then, there was slang called heat and pig. But I'm going to tell you right now, you call a cop a pig, you can expect whatever the heck you're going to get. In my household, we didn't do that. We respected the police a lot. But the people on the streets protesting, especially like in Chicago '68 and stuff, it was a whole different thing, I guess. But keep cool, man. Keep groovy. Stay groovy. Was all about just hanging in there. Um, there were other stuff. I mean, a lot of slang for marijuana and stuff like that because that was getting big and it was illegal, and people had a lot of slang for that too. But a lot of the slang for the hippies and stuff like that, kind of, I don't know. It was just the time of the thing. Every generation has their own slang, and hopefully you guys keep cool too. I think that when most people look at the height of hippiedom is really the summer of love, summer of '67. And in '67, so many people they went west. They went to San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury. And that was the time when a lot of these people were just kind of going, and there's songs out there. Have you gone? Are you going to San Francisco? If so, wear like flowers in your hair. And it was a big movement, a lot of like Volkswagens and tie-dyed stuff, and everybody headed out west. And this is really the rise of like communal living and people living out there trying to live more naturally and stuff like that. And this is before 67 is before, obviously, you've got, Ted and all that other stuff, and Kent State and everything of the early, late 60s, 70s. So this is kind of like the innocence of the hippie movement. The music of the era, it's got a whole different feel to it. There's a lot of people who are called folk singers, like the Peter, Paul, and Marys, and these are the people out there that sing. But Bob Dylan is the greatest of all these. Bob Dylan's the greatest songwriter ever. That man he wrote powerful songs. Not the greatest voice. Everybody else sings Bob Dylan, but his music speaks to a generation. And so Bob Dylan out there had really powerful songs, but other people sang them and covered them. Jefferson Airplane later on becomes Jefferson Starship, then just Starship. The Beatles. Well, the Beatles, the British invasion comes in the 60s, starts out one way, but by 67, 68, the British invasion, the Beatles kind of embraces that whole flower child, long-haired stuff. Then you get stuff like, Yellow Submarine and Sgt. Pepper's, and you start getting a lot of different albums from the Beatles. The Who was a big, powerful group, and their big song, My Generation. Janis Joplin, You and Me, Bobby McGee, and talks about being free and going out there and traveling the country. Jimi Hendrix, hell of a guitarist. If you want to watch something, watch like Woodstock. And Hendrix comes out and he plays the national anthem on his guitar. But it's got so much discord in it. What he's really trying to show with that is how America was full of discord because of the reaction to the Vietnam War and everything like that. CCR, oh my God, gotta love CCR. John Fogerty, the lead singer of CCR, had a voice that was so distinct. And CCR is like Fortunate Son. You had that in when we talked about Civil War, about Vietnam protest music, about people who were drafted because they didn't have daddies that were millionaires and stuff like that. But CCR was a power group, great group. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, a lot of stuff. And then you get to think of like Iron Butterfly, which is just real heavy, a lot of organ music and stuff. Their Inagata Davida is still a weird song, even for me. And there's other stuff like Buffalo Springfield and the band, you'll hear. But the music from that era, it's young music. A lot of it has messages and kind of a little bit about being rebellious too. It just has a feel to it from that era. The height of it would have to be the Woodstock celebration. If you look at the picture, 3 days of peace and music, you'll probably put in there a little bit of mud and a lot of drugs because that's what Woodstock kind of ended up. But it was in 1969. It's going to be held in the summertime up in New York. And where they originally were going to hold it, start thinking, do we really want all these hippies? No. And so they found a guy who had a dairy farm. I think his name was Max Yasgur. And he opened it up to these kids. And if you look, they built a huge stage and they had these fences. And what was supposed to be this money-making big music festival where you have all these great things, by the end, it becomes crazy. The crowds just overwhelm everything. People are parking their cars and walk in. They trample the fences. And it becomes a free concert, and it becomes huge. But it's a major statement of the era. For people of that era, if they could say they were at Woodstock, boy, that's like a cachet thing. Like, whoa. I remember Woodstock from Lincoln, Nebraska. We went down to visit my grandma and grandpa in Lincoln. And Grandma was in the other room watching the news. Then all of a sudden she yells, "Oh my God, Everett, those kids are naked." Well, we didn't know what she was talking about, so all we kids run in there, and she made Grandpa turn off the TV. And I asked Dad, "What's that about?" He goes, "Nothing but a bunch of those hippies, someplace called Woodstock. It's a bunch of hippies. You kids don't watch that," or something like that. And so that was my thing of Woodstock. What the heck is that? Because again, in Omaha, in Bennington, it was a lot different. Woodstock meant a lot to those people that went there, but it was more a statement, I think, for the younger people and the groups that played there. All the big groups, everybody that was anybody, did Woodstock, and it was a huge statement. There's songs out there about Woodstock. It became really popular, and in a way, that's kind of like the epicenter of the whole movement. Altamont is going to be the West Coast version of Woodstock, called the West Coast Woodstock, and it's a disaster. The Rolling Stones are the headliners in this one, so they do it at the Altamont Speedway, and kids come in, but in a very misguided thing, they get the Hells Angels to provide security, and that's maybe not the best plan. I don't know. I'd read somewhere. I think they paid him and they gave him like kegs of beer, which again is not a good plan. As a matter of fact, during the concert, when Mick Jagger is singing and they're talking about the song about the devil, who's my name, a young man does get killed, and in the end, it is a disaster. And so after Altamont, you're not going to have any more of these big concerts. I mean, Woodstock was that ultimate love of peace and love and all that. Altamont was just a disaster and kind of ends that era. A couple other things, just throwing them in there. Andy Warhol is so abstract, he becomes like a voice of this era, a rebel. If you look at like over there, the pictures, different pictures of Marilyn showing that Marilyn, there's different aspects of everybody as well to Marilyn. So we took a picture with different colors. He's showing that. His most famous thing is basically his Campbell's soup can art. Again, my dad never understood that. He said, "You want art? Here's a can of soup." I say, "Dad, I think it means something else," but I, as a kid, didn't really understand. Kurt Vonnegut becomes an author of this era. It's important. His Slaughterhouse-Five is a very interesting book because Kurt Vonnegut was affected by World War II. This is the start of the Rolling Stone, the magazine. It's a whole different time period. TV during this time grows up differently, how we look at things. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about one of the most important shows in American history, All in the Family. All in the Family by Norman Lear was a look at America through different eyes, and it tried to challenge America. If you look in the picture there, the guy with the hat and under All in the Family, that's Archie Bunker, the star, played by Carol Connor. And Archie is a New Yorker. He's a hardcore American, and he hates hippies. Imagine it's surprising when his daughter marries a hippie. So you have a hippie and her husband and a hardcore guy in the same house, and it causes a lot of unrest. But that's the way they could look at all sorts of things in America. If you look at the picture, when Archie is a little bit racist, and there's an episode where Sammy Davis Jr., this movie star, comes, and Archie's so excited, so he wants a picture, and so Sammy Davis, if you look at him, just kisses Archie, and here's Archie. He doesn't know what to do because, he wants to show everybody he knows this movie star, but here's this guy kissing him, and, being kind of homophobic, Archie has no idea what to do. All in the Family really changes how America looks at themselves. It's a really shocking TV, and it's got if you look back now, it's tame compared to what we watch on today. It's no Game of Thrones or anything. But back then, it was really something. And they took a look at a lot of issues that nobody wanted to look at. MASH, my favorite show as a kid. I love MASH. MASH was a look at war. But you couldn't have a TV show about the Vietnam War while the Vietnam War is going. So MASH is set in the Korean War, but in effect, it's a look at the Vietnam War. And if you look at it, a lot of the characters have longer hair. It's got people in there that people could relate to. There's a draft dodger. Klinger plays a draft dodger, someone trying to get out of the military. There's hippies. Hey, Hawkeye is a hippie. Look at the long hair. That never would have happened in the military. And he's against war. Frank Burns symbolizes kind of the Army and how the Army did stuff stupidly. And so MASH is a look at the Vietnam War by looking at the Korean War. And it spoofs it. And again, it is another way that America all of a sudden on TV starts looking at things really different. Today, we've got a lot of shows out there that are really cutting and raw. But back then, those two shows there made us look at ourselves. And America wasn't quite sure. And we liked what we were seeing and how we were changing and how we were splitting as a country. So this has just been a quick little look at the hippie era, other things and how American society is changing during that time. On a side note, God, I miss those days. I miss the bell bottoms, the long Jesus hair, the hippies, the this, the that. It was just a different time. It was my kidhood. And there was a lot of things about America then that we had problems with that needed to be fixed. But it's a type of time in American history that will never come back.